Can you guess why civilization's collapse isn't war, famine, or disease, but a desire made at the dinner table? In 1935, a small tribe in New Orleans, USA, made a decision that would destroy their culture in a single generation. They began hunting and consuming the brain tissue of large eagles, supreme hunters their ancestors had avoided for thousands of years. After 5 months, people started dying, not from infection, not from starvation, from something that attacked the brain itself. Their bodies locked, their minds dissolved. They screamed in pain as their own neurons turned against them. The medical students called it Prion disease. But what they were witnessing was something far more threatening. They were watching a civilization consume its own extinction. I believe you are in doubt. In a moment you will understand what's about to be revealed, because what killed that tribe wasn't the eagles themselves. It was something far more wicked, something that has been hiding in predator flesh for millions of years, waiting to be activated by consumption. This is not a survival myth. This is not superstition. This is the real reason every culture on Earth, independently and without communication, learned the exact same rule: never eat apex predators. Humans eat herbivores. We rear cattle, goats, sheep. We eat omnivores, pigs, bears. We even hunt and consume smaller carnivores. In survival situations, we've eaten almost every living thing on Earth. But titans of the Earth, the animals at the absolute top of every food chain, every single human civilization has forbidden law. Hunt them, study them, respect them, but never consume them. It is not strictly enforced by law. It isn't taught in schools. Yet it persists across African tribes, Asian cultures, indigenous peoples in the Americas, Polynesian societies, populations that have never communicated, yet follow the exact same rule. Why? Stay with me. You will understand the logical horror hiding in predator flesh, a protein that literally rewires human brains, transforming living minds into deteriorating machines. You will acknowledge how kings of the food chain accumulate this protein over their lifetimes, concentrating it in their organs and tissue. And you will realize that the taboo against predator meat isn't cultural superstition. It's survival instinct, encoded into our species' collective memory. The first article case came from an Arctic exploration expedition in 1830. Swedish explorers consumed polar bear liver and recorded something unprecedented. After 2 weeks, team members experienced severe unbalanced symptoms, headaches, tremors, cognitive decline. Within weeks, some died. Their autopsies revealed something shocking. Their brains had begun to worsen. Holes had formed in brain tissue, as if something had eaten through the neural architecture itself. The scientists called it spongiform degeneration. They didn't know what caused it. They didn't understand the mechanism, but they recorded it meticulously. In Faroe Island, scientists studying disease patterns found an anomaly, a neurological illness called kuru, a disease that makes the brain imbalance, appeared primarily in communities practicing ritualistic cannibalism. But isolated cases appeared in communities with no history of consuming human flesh. Some of their characters, they had hunted and eaten large marine and terrestrial predators. The connection was subtle, but it was there. In the 1945s, medical researchers in Mexico documented the tribal case that changed everything. A population that had begun consuming eagle brain tissue, a restricted violation among their ancestors, experienced fast-growth neurological collapse. The virus spread through the tribe like a sickness of the mind. Scientists brought in tissue samples, examined brain autopsies. What they found was unmistakable. The same spongiform degeneration, the same neural deterioration, the same pattern that appeared in kuru patients. Then came the breakthrough. In 1987, Matthew Smith won the Nobel Prize for discovering prions, infectious proteins that cause neurodegenerative disease. These proteins, when consumed, cross the intestinal barrier and attack the brain directly. They're not bacteria, not viruses. They're misfolded proteins that cause other proteins to misfold in a cascade reaction. And kings of the food chain, scientists discovered, carried extraordinarily high concentrations of these prion proteins. The pattern was unmistakable. The mechanism was finally visible. A prion is virtually a protein that has folded incorrectly. Instead of the normal three-dimensional shape that allows proteins to function, a prion folds into a shape that damages neural tissue. When a prion enters the brain, it causes nearby normal proteins to unfold into the prion shape, a cascade reaction that spreads throughout the brain like a contagion. But here's where it becomes genuinely terrifying. Kings of the food chain accumulate prions throughout their entire lifespan. A jaguar that hunts and kills dozens of herbivores over its lifetime is consuming animals that may carry prion diseases: bovine spongiform encephalopathy from cattle, scrapie from sheep, chronic wasting disease from deer. These prion proteins don't break down in the predator's digestive system. They cross the intestinal barrier and lodge in the predator's brain and nervous tissue. Over 2 decades, these prion proteins accumulate. They concentrate. They establish themselves in the predator's neural architecture. A winter bear that lives for 30 years, hunting hundreds of small mammals and insects, accumulates generations' worth of prion protein in its organs and brain tissue. A green anaconda that hunts and kills dozens of prey species over its 25-year lifespan concentrates prion proteins from every organism it consumes. A leading prion researcher at the University of Edinburgh documented that prion concentrations in predators' brain tissue are 40 to 200 times higher than in herbivore brain tissue, depending on the species and the hunting history. Human beings should not consume predator meat, particularly the brain and liver. They're ingesting concentrated prion proteins from potentially hundreds of different prey animals consumed by that predator over its entire lifetime. A single meal of predator brain tissue can deliver a prion load equivalent to consuming dozens of infected herbivores. The prion proteins cross the human intestinal barrier. They enter the bloodstream. They cross the blood-brain barrier, and then they begin their cascade. The normal proteins in the human brain encounter these misfolded proteins. They refold. The cascade begins, and it doesn't stop until the brain has been transformed into a sponge, filled with holes, unable to function, collapsing into dementia and death. Kindly listen to my question, and this is crucial. When kings of the food chain accumulate these prion proteins throughout their lives, do you think they show symptoms of prion disease themselves? Do predators go mad? Do they deteriorate neurologically while alive? Or does something protect them from the prions accumulating in their own brains? What's your instinct? Drop your prediction in the comments, because the answer reveals something terrifying about how nature designed this disease and why predators are immune to something that destroys every other species. This is where the revelation becomes genuinely disturbing, because when scientists examined this question, the answer was chilling. Their neural tissue contains a genetic variation that prevents prion proteins from being recognized as foreign. Their immune systems don't attack misfolded proteins. Their brains don't trigger the cascade reaction that destroys other species. This is the cruelest irony of nature. Kings of the food chain can safely accumulate prion proteins in their tissue because they are immune to prion disease. They are biological storage tanks for a neurotoxin that doesn't harm them but is absolutely lethal to every other species. A jaguar can consume infected prey and accumulate prion proteins for decades without experiencing a single symptom. The prions lodge in its brain, its liver, its organ tissue, waiting. But when a person consumes that jaguar's brain, the prion proteins enter a nervous system that has no natural immunity. The cascade begins, and it is unstoppable. Dr. Eakwood documented cases of cannibals who consumed prion-infected brain tissue and died within months. He documented cases of families who consumed contaminated game meat and experienced rapid neurological collapse across multiple generations. The pattern is always the same: exposure, latency, deterioration, death, and the timeline is unpredictable. Some victims show symptoms within months, others show symptoms years or even decades later. The disease is dormant, hidden, spreading through the brain silently until the damage becomes undeniable. This explains why the restrictions against predator meat is so absolute, why it appears across cultures with no communication between them. Civilizations that violated this taboo didn't just lose a few people to disease, They experienced cascading neurological collapse that wiped entire societies. Tribal knowledge keepers died. Elders perished. The accumulated wisdom of cultures vanished. The cultures that survived were the ones that learned the rule. Kings of food chain are not food. And they learned it the only way nature teaches harsh lessons, through the deaths of those who didn't listen. In 2010, the World Health Organization quietly issued a directive to all member nations. Do not consume kings of food chain meat. The risk of prion disease exposure is too high. The directive was buried in technical documentation. Few people saw it. The media didn't report it. It wasn't in front of newspapers. But it confirmed what indigenous cultures had known for thousands of years. Predator meat is not food. It is a biological trap. Every king of food chain on Earth carries concentrated prion proteins in its tissue, proteins accumulated from a lifetime of hunting infected prey. Those prions are dormant in the predator. What we learned from studying prion diseases reveals something profound about nature's design. This isn't random. This isn't coincidence. This is nature's law, a law so critical to human survival that it became encoded in human culture itself, passed down as forbidden, as instinct, as an unspoken rule that transcended language and geography. Kings of the food chain are not meant to be eaten, not because we lack the ability to kill them, not because we lack the skills to cook them, but because their flesh carries a neurotoxin that nature designed them to be immune to, a toxin that rewires human brains into deteriorating machines. Some rules exist because they must, and some forbidden truth persist because breaking them costs everything. It's an honor listening to this deeply disturbing truth. You now know something most people will never understand. Predator meat isn't forbidden by law, it's forbidden by biology.